I'm Richard Nixon and I approve this message. It's time for a coverkillernation debut, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time I've ever talked about this band, even though this is their 9th album that I will be speaking about here tonight. Cassiopeia, from the band Nightfall, which is their follow-up to Ashton Black and the 30 Tyrants, which was the first album they released under Metal Blade Records. So this is album number 2 with Metal Blade, and Ashton Black received a widespread amount of worldwide acclaim from both reviewers and critics alike. So these are definitely a pair of guys that need to be spoken about. Now, this band throughout their career have sampled various parts of the metal puzzle. They've dabbled into gothic metal, some black metal, some symphonic black metal, some melodic death metal. So really, what you know going in, that there's going to be a wide range of variety here. There's going to be a lot of different influence. And these guys are Greeks, so you know who was also from Greece, one of their contemporaries, Rotting Christ. And I definitely feel and hear a little bit in their structures throughout this album, and throughout some other elements of their discography, a very close connection between the band, and it's mainly because one of their former members went on to perform with Rotting Christ. In fact, there's a lot of history behind this band that even includes Gus G., who later became Ozzy's guitar player. No, Gus G was never in Nightfall. 2 members of Nightfall instead departed to go play with Firewind with Gus G. So, yeah, let's talk about this album. This album is 10 tracks in length, and it clocks in at a little bit more than 50 minutes in length. And I have to say, these guys have a lot to offer. These guys actually have an amazing amount to offer, which is kind of left me disappointed that I didn't cover their previous album, but it was a different time back then in 2010 whenever Ashton Black and the 30 Tyrants came out, so I'm just happy that I'm able to review this one here. With this album, the influences that I cited recently at the start of the video, the gothic influence, the symphonic black metal influence, the melodic death influence, are all kind of fused together in order to create some sort of hybrid that is very interesting, that you hear a lot with Rotting Christ a little bit, because if you listen to Rotting Christ's material, they had that elder work, which is a little bit more resemblant of a black metal sound, and they have eventually evolved it with a little bit more melody with their most recent albums, and they of course have one coming this year that will probably offer more of the same. However, with this album, the riffs are the first thing that I noticed. The symphonic side is definitely a nice element, something that you hear sometimes in the black metal and even in the death metal ranks, and it is always something that adds a little bit of dynamism, a little bit of structure. It's a little something different from the traditional formula. Some people may cite it as gimmicky, but I always find it to be a little bit of a nice add-on, considering it is able to add an additional layer of atmosphere to the overall body of work, which perhaps may not have the point driven across quite as well without it. So that's something that with these guys, it certainly gives them a bit of a competitive advantage, so to speak. And now another thing that I also noticed alongside the just the basis of the riffs, but also the majesty of them. These guys have a tremendous amount of talent as far as the core guitar team is able to be talked about. They have a lot of powerful riffs, very, very good solos. The flows to these songs are absolutely fantastic. There's very, very few tracks on this album that I feel the need to call either weak or just not quite up to the same standard that have been heard on the remainder of the disc. So this is something where not only is the flow exquisite, but also the palette of the songwriting for those that have been offered to us on this record is also exquisite. Overall, whenever you're listening to this album, and really just overall whenever you're listening to this band in general, you're getting a lot thrown at you, but it's all things that are generally enjoyable. You're enjoying those little subtle twinges of the gothic metal side that you maybe have heard in bands in the past. Maybe you have a twinge of Old Sentenced in mind here or there, but just with a lot more heaviness, with a lot more of that trademark in-your-face heaviness. And you have that Rotting Christ influence that seems consistent throughout all of this and is able to give you a good overall body, a good overall theme, and something really positive to remain in the back burner of your mind. But what makes Nightfall stand really by itself is the fact that whenever you put all of these different ideas together, whenever you thrust them all into the forefront, once combination has occurred, just like any sort of chemical mix, just like anything that you can concoct by the presence of multiple ingredients that are very, very tediously added and very carefully rationed out, you have the makings of an album that has a lot of diversity, a lot of dynamisty to it, and overall gives you a very enjoyable listen. One that you can repeat multiple times and still find new and exciting things that perhaps you missed the first time, either that or something that you had heard the first time, but it didn't hit you the same way as it has this time. Things like that in an album are what create timeless records, but it's also what kind of pushes just good records into the realm of great. And this is exactly what happened with Cassiopeia by Nightfall. This is an album that perhaps without those symphonic influences, without that little twinge of gothic metal, without without all of these pieces coming together, if it would only have been one of these pieces, it may not really have had that much of an impact. Without the idea that sort of has a very Nile background to it, where they're speaking a lot about culture and a lot of olden legend and kind of sticking with a lot of old gods and goddesses, you might not have the same punch if they're just talking about death, or if they're just talking about misanthropy or this or that. Instead, you have a fine layered variety. The growls are very, very good also. There's a little bit more of a depth to it than you've heard with other contemporaries of this genre, so that blended with the music also works very well because everything seems to fit one another, really just like a glove. Overall, this is an album that's going to be enjoyed by many realms of the metal universe. If you're not one for growls, then this may not be for you, or it may be the fitting way for you to get used to growls and really learn to enjoy them. Because even though there is not a really, really insane range of growls being used and employed on this album, it's something that's just consistent enough that you can really, I guess, understand the whole meaning behind it, and understand that if you just heard some deep or some high-pitched voice singing over this music, that it just wouldn't have the same impact. It would not hit you the same way as it does the way in which it's being shown and performed here. Overall, I have to say that this is a great album. I'm going to have to give it an 8.3 out of 10. There's a lot of strength here. I really love the riffs. Very, very big riffs. Very awesome harmonies. And the diversity and the difference that you hear here, that you hear in this album, is definitely the things that have set it over the top. A great early album here in 2013, something that I am very excited to have listened to, and it's something that I am passing along to you guys and encouraging that you guys check it out. I hope you do, and I'll see you next time. Cover Killer Nation, out.